All right, so we are back after a winter hiatus. We're officially starting our 2023 podcast season with Picard's premiere, the season 3 premiere, episode 1, titled The Next Generation. We have a lot to sort through because this episode neatly pushed a lot of things into place. A lot of intriguing variables.
Yeah.
And we will get into all of them. If you are a new listener to us, you can find all of our shows pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search From the Holodeck. Our preferred feeds are Spotify and iTunes. That way you can leave us reviews and give us a thumbs up. Also, you can find us on Twitter at From the Holodeck and Facebook, facebook.com/Star Trek From the Holodeck. Okay, David. So things are off to a very intriguing start.
Yeah.
Matalas, as we know, the showrunner, has indirectly asserted that season 3 of Star Trek Picard was going to essentially realign Picard's story with the roots of TNG and Star Trek as a whole. To put it simple, or in other words, the familiar.
Yes.
Something that fans can find familiar. That was, I feel like a lot of critiques of Picard's first 2 seasons have had a lot of generalizations and also some little minute issues here and there that people have voiced, and some big ones. But the general, I think, idea that people can agree on is that Picard doesn't really feel all like Picard.
No, that's been a criticism for the entire show for the past 2 seasons. Is like
one of the more unified criticisms, right?
And it's one of the more understandable criticisms too, because like since the very beginning, we all were told that we're trying to tell a very different and personal story on Picard. And I think they succeeded in that. They tried to actually get there with season 1. And in season 2, it really got there, especially when you put the right pieces in place.
The ingredients were there. The execution could have been better.
And that's what actually really hindered it in the end, was the execution. So then news of season 3 started coming out. And, I was worried that basically they're just going to throw fan service all over the place. And there's not going to be much substance behind what we see. I can actually comfortably say that for the first episode, I was proven wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There is stuff that they're putting behind. Yeah, they're putting like what you said, the familiar, the fan service type of moments in here.
Well, is it fan service or is it just Matalas trying to align Star Trek Picard with something more familiar? And okay, let me say it like this. Picard's story through TNG and the movies and Picard season 1 and 2 were a puzzle. Season 1 and season 2, each as its own separate puzzle piece, they don't quite fit in that picture. You know how when you buy a puzzle and one of the pieces might be defective from the factory?
Oh, yeah.
And it wants to fit but doesn't quite fit, so you have to force it? That's not a negative. I'm not talking shit right now of season 1 and season 2. I'm simply saying that that's kind of the way a lot of fans have felt. Sometimes they vocalize it, sometimes they're not sure how to vocalize it, but essentially that's the best way to describe it. They're puzzle pieces that seem like they should fit, but they don't quite fit. Whereas season 3 feels like it's the beginnings of a piece of the puzzle that will in fact end up fitting a little more naturally, organically, with the evolving story of Picard and, of course, the TNG era as a whole.
And I think that one of the biggest differences between season 1 and season 2, season 3 is not placated immediately by a mystery. It's not a mystery. Yes, there's like a narrative that we have to follow, where there's questions we have.
Yeah.
But if you think about like the first 2 seasons, everything was built around a twist or
Yeah. Well, that also hindered Discovery's first season.
Exactly. And with season 3, the way they open up, you kind of can tell where they're going. This is essentially, in one episode, they say the story is going to center around the relationship between Picard, Crusher, and the rest of the TNG crew. What happens to them? This is their quote unquote final adventure together.
So you think this is the actual framing pieces?
Yeah.
Like not just the beginning. You think this will be the actual frame?
I
Like
think
the rest of the season will rely on everything here.
Yeah, I think the frame is now in place. Where in like season 1 and season 2, we didn't know what the freaking frame was. We didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
Because was the framing in season 1 Data? I don't know. I thought it was supposed to be Picard.
Season 1 had a lot of disjointed aspects that didn't really quite sync up. It was a fractured narrative. It wasn't a bad idea, but it was a fractured narrative. Season 2 was written better, but it was less exciting.
Yes.
As season 1. Season 3, I'm hoping they get right. And I would say, based on everything we've been talking about so far, I would say, based on the overall presentation of the first episode, there is a concerted effort to break free of the original concept of Picard and bring it back to its roots of Trek tradition, or at least the TNG tradition, particularly in cinematic form. Oh, yeah. So they are forgetting the original concept of Picard, which was the story of Picard. And they're replacing it. And if you need any more evidence of that, it's in text form, and it's the title of the episode, The Next Generation. Why would you start the episode off with that title, or I should say start the season off with that particular title? It's to signal a couple things. I have a few ideas. Number one is the obvious. This is the beginning of the new story of The Next Generation, but also this can take us right back to things that were said at conventions and interviews leading up to Picard season 3, that there seems to be an allusion to the fact that there may be a spinoff of Picard's show. Yeah. So in essence, we could also be witnessing the beginning of a new generation built on top of the backs of the old Next Generation.
And that's how it should be. That's how it should have been from the get-go. But unfortunately, just as we said, the execution just didn't work.
Yeah.
You didn't have the creative minds all working in sync like we do now with Terry Matalas.
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Because Terry Matalas, at least with Matalas, we know and can see that he has a game plan. It's not like one of the biggest criticisms. I know we always criticize Michael Chabon for season 1, but the one thing I always said was the fact that he didn't know his ending.
Right. He has said that.
That's ridiculous to me. That is absolutely ridiculous. With Terry Matalas, we can tell that he has a game plan.
He better.
Because he's playing with fire in the first episode.
Yeah. Well, I will say, for reasons that are associated with my own identification as a Trek fan, the strategy, everything we've seen in the first episode, as well as the things we've heard in interviews, the strategy feels sound.
Yeah.
But from a more critical perspective, I have an alternative view that I will share towards the end of our discussion. And when I say critical, that doesn't mean a negative, but rather to simply bring the discussion into a more qualitative and interpretive realm of analysis, where I want to talk about the postmodernism and narrative closure aspects that affect not just Picard, but all of Star Trek over the last, say, 15 years, including the Kelvin Timeline movies and the Alex Kurtzman era with, I should say, starting with Discovery.
Oh, yeah.
So if we have time, we'll get into that. I'm hoping, because we're already 12 minutes in and we haven't even scraped the surface
yet.
Okay, so we've got a lot to discuss, but first, Dave, I was going to go directly to you to get more of a formalized, brief initial thoughts on the episode, but I think you shared that, right? Is there a little more you want to share before we get into this episode, or did you say your piece?
As a summary of like what I thought about it's obvious that what I thought about the episode was, I thought the episode was good.
Okay.
It's just the fact that I find myself a little hesitant now because you gave me one really bad season, a okay season, and then you're supposed to make me believe that basically just after one episode everything is fixed.
Yeah.
I'm a little gun shy.
No, I get it. I think there's a lot of people that are with you there. There are some people who, and I envy these people, who can just sit down and just be completely excited and stoked to see some Picard stories and Next Generation stories. Unfortunately, I don't know how to turn my brain off for sheer escapism, and I have to also have everything that should come with Star Trek, which is well-told, character-driven stories centered around the human condition.
And substance.
Yeah, a.k.a. substance. So if that's going to be a part of season 3, then I have no problem with that because I feel like the first 2 seasons, second season got into it a bit with trauma. No, they got into it a lot. The second season, that's why I didn't have a problem with the second season like a lot of people did, because I felt like the things that need to be there for Star Trek were there. Season 1 just felt like they weren't sure what to do. But all right, let's forget all that. Let's look at the future. Let's not live in the past. I want to be positive. I want to be happy. So let's start things off. So this episode, titled "The Next Generation," was directed by Doug Arniokoski and written by Terry Matalas. The synopsis: after receiving a cryptic, urgent distress call from Dr. Beverly Crusher, Admiral Jean-Luc Picard enlists help from generations old and new to embark on one final adventure, a daring mission that will change Starfleet and his old crew forever. So before we get into instances of plot, I want to talk about writing and directing. Matalas did an excellent job with this script. I will just say that right from the get-go. There was just the right amount of time spent with each of our core Picard cast. There's a difference. Seven, Raffi, and Picard. And that's one thing that was a huge strength for me. Because what did I say, Dave, before we started this season? Behind closed doors, when the mics were off, I said my biggest problem with all of these ideas is that they're changing the entire concept of the show. Are the Next Generation cast now going to supersede or overwrite the characters that they were introduced? Because they already got rid of 80% of the Picard cast between season 1 and season 2. Yeah. And the only ones left are Seven and Raffi. And look what they did. Most of the story, Riker was a Klinger honor.
Yes.
He was a part of Picard. Seven had her own thing going. Raffi had her own thing going. And no doubt they're all going to come together. They're going to converge. And Picard had his thing. So the 3 core characters of Picard were the ones leading. They were the narrative powers.
Yes, the narrative ties.
They were the narrative ties. Yes, they were the one pushing the plot forward. And that was a huge plus for me because it shows me that Matalas wasn't about throwing everything out the fucking, front door, everything and the sink. It was about just say, hey, listen, we're going to introduce new TNG elements, but hey, we know what the show is. It's still Picard, and including with that the cast of Picard. So I like that quite a bit, that it revolved around Seven, Raffi, and Picard, each functioning as narrative anchors, positioned in the right way in order to disperse an adequate amount of story and flesh out new ideas and situations.
Well, that was the amazing thing about this one episode was no character was wasted.
No.
Like, the problem that I had with season 1 and season 2 was you had so many characters and they all were just wasted. They didn't do anything for the narrative.
A lot of them didn't really have purpose.
They didn't have purpose. Here, you took the 3 characters of Picard the past couple seasons and you basically made each one important to the story.
Every character.
The amazing thing was that I give Matalas a lot of props for was the way he uses Raffi. Raffi is not done to do a poignant personal story. Her point in this story is to actually introduce us into the threat. That is the threat. The whole premise of the weapon and getting to see what the weapon is that we should be afraid of, that was Raffi's story.
Mm-hmm.
That's her importance.
Yeah.
It's not oh, we need to do a story about Raffi's relationship with Seven. No, that's in the background.
Or a son
Or a
that
son that
we
doesn't-
see once and has no real bearing on the story.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right, Dave. Every single, but that was my point with how well the script was written.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it revolved around our three lead characters, that's how a fucking TV show should be written.
Should be written.
And they did it perfectly. Also, Doug, the director, Arnie Okowski, or Koski.
Or Koski, I think.
It's Arnie Okowski. Yeah. His directing emphasized personality, charm, and the larger sequences, working in tandem with the writing, it all alluded to a much bigger story world or diegesis that didn't feel purposely elusive, but adequately constrained for purposes of mystery. So there was not the attention to keeping things closed. That was one of my issues that I've had since season 1. If people go back, if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's this attempt to create this constrained view of the world.
Yeah.
Whereas this, through directing and, of course, the writing, it shaped a larger scope. We were able to see things differently. We saw the functions of the bridge on the USS Titan. We weren't secluded to one specific portion, which, I have my own problems with that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they're only building, half sets nowadays with virtual production. So there's a whole problem or I should say there's a whole issue pertaining to that. So I like that as well. And lastly, another highlight was, thank God, we were able to actually see the USS Titan.
Yes.
And I'm not talking because we've never seen the Titan before. I'm talking about the bullshit visual effects that has become a plague on many modern television shows, Picard in particular, where they hide every effect with light blooms, blown out camera lenses, and we never actually see the crisp starships.
Clear. Yep.
If you compare the starships that we get to the things from yesteryear, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, there was a clear defining angles on the vessels that weren't blurred out with visual effects. We actually saw USS Titan in all its glory emerge from space dock
Which was awesome.
with no visual effects bullshit to muddle the image.
Yes. And
Did you notice that?
Oh, absolutely. This is the first time that we've gotten to see a Star Trek, honestly, getting the real feel of the Star Trek universe because of we finally got to see a ship.
And it felt right.
It felt right. Especially when Riker kind of looks at it and says, hello, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, you're damn right, that's your ship.
And I know it's a little referential. We've seen these scenes before in all of Star Trek where you're in space dock or you're leaving a star base, and they put a lot of emphasis on taking her out. I'm okay with stuff like that because it's become a part of Star Trek to see your vessel for the first time in all its glory leaving space dock and flying into the stars. So that just felt right. So going back to what Matalas said about wanting to capture the original feel of the Star Trek films, he did it with that very scene right there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to turn the TV off, Dave.
Why? What's wrong?
You are watching it and not listening. Fucking David.
No, I wasn't watching
If you guys
it.
are in the studio, I have a TV up that plays Star Trek 24 hours a day. And he's watching this. I have the camera on you. I saw you. Jesus Christ. Anyways, visual effects were great. I didn't have a problem with them. And that's a problem that I've had even with Discovery.
Well, dude, think about like
the
one criticism.
blown out
Remember
lenses.
Remember the criticism we had with like how they treated ships.
I want to see a fucking ship.
Yeah. Even like in second season, we were like going, man, I hope we can finally see a ship. And even though they did to some degree, it was always kind of masked. It was always kind of hidden. It never like, you never really got a gravity of it flying through space.
Yeah.
Here, we finally got to get our Star Trek actually, I don't know if it's a bad thing to say, but the stereotypical Star Trek scene where we get to see the ship
David,
fly through space.
I just said that, and that's why you weren't listening. That's why I had to turn the TV off, you motherfucker.
I'm just reaffirming it.
Oh, man. I can't even get my co-host to listen. How do I expect the listeners to pay attention?
It's a long night.
So just to close out this particular segment here, if listeners out there aren't sure what we're talking about, Dave, all you have to do is flip on any Star Trek from the Kurtzman era. And mind you, I have liked 80%, if not more, of the Kurtzman era, despite some of the problems I have here and there. But one problem that keeps coming back is the fact that Discovery doesn't do it as much, but they have their moments where they just muddle these beautiful spacescapes with blurred effects. It's an epidemic on television specifically, and it has to do with lower budgets and not having the confidence in your visual effects to just show it, so you have to hide it and mask it. And the reason why I say this because I know that I've worked in visual effects. You learn how to mask some of your effects when you don't have the budget of, say, a Marvel film.
Well, the thing that also baffles me, though, like I know we try to defend Discovery because of their budget, but look at Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds was able to pull it off, dude.
Yeah, but
their budget is not that high.
They definitely showed the Enterprise a lot more, but also, Dave, go back and the scenes have that blown out effect.
It still has the, the ghostly effect.
The ghostly effect.
The ghostly effect.
I don't like it. It's awful. It is being used in so much TV now, but they pulled back with the USS Titan.
Yeah.
And that made me happy. All right, so let's talk about Dr. Crusher. This was a big thing.
Oh, dude.
First off, how sad. No one's seen or heard from her for over 20 years. She cut herself off from everyone she knows.
Although, me and you have talked about it off air, I think she has a good reason.
We'll get into that, Dave. So, one big reveal already in the first episode was that she has another kid. And he's not nearly as annoying as Will.
Sorry, Will. Sorry, Will. You've been replaced.
Yeah. So the internet's a buzz with this, and most people are saying what you had said off air, Dave.
Yeah.
And it's an easy theory to go with, right? He's Picard's son.
He's Picard's son. Absolutely.
Because they did make it a point to remind the audience that they did have an on-again, off-again type of thing. Or I want to say that conversation he had with his Romulan gal, I forgot her first name, she had even said, didn't you have something going on with her? And he said, we had tried.
Yes.
So.
And that's why I'm like going, it's by far his kid.
Well, David, if it is, I would be okay with that. I'm not a big fan of, hey, you got a surprise kid. It worked with Star Trek 2, with David and Carol Marcus. That worked just fine. But in general, when it comes to movies doing surprise kids, it screams of melodrama from soap operas.
It does, but I think in this regard, it makes sense.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If it is his son, and this is to believe that this is the true final season of Picard, which is essentially ending his story, even though we know he'll probably be back in some form, if you want to believe the interviews. If you're closing out a show called Picard, and a lot of it has had to do with his legacy, his life after Starfleet, and the amazing closure we had with his familial trauma connected to his mother, which was the strength of last season, was so good. We finally learned why Picard is so shut off emotionally. If they were to now give him the very thing he lost way back in Generations, a legacy to continue on the Picard name, and then if you remember, what did he say at the very beginning of the episode to his girlfriend? I don't need a legacy, with a little smirk.
He wants a new adventure.
They brought that up purposely. So
Yes.
if this is his son, that's going to be his legacy. They're going to hopefully bring that into the emotional aspects as you're building out Picard this season.
Yeah.
That'd be a great way to keep the show personal. They have to keep it personal because that's the one consistent thing besides the character himself, Picard, from season 1 and now to season 3. And it's
Yes.
the fact that we learned something a little. Season 1 was a little messy, but it did deal with his trauma still with the Borg.
Yes.
It felt a little bit like First Contact Take 2.
Uh-huh.
You know, like, hey, we're going to, we dealt with your trauma, but we're going to reiterate and remind people.
What we already know.
Yeah, but it still dealt with him and his problems. Season 2 built on that and then dissected an issue that we had known about him since day 1. Since his introduction in Encounter at Farpoint, we understood that he was very closed off.
Yes.
So now, third season, we introduce this element. We have to have something of a personal
Of a personal nature to him.
of a personal nature. That's what we have to have. And if it's this kid, I think that works.
Oh no, yeah, because like even narratively, going from the story of like, I will never forget that moment between him and Q in the very end of season 2, where Q is telling him
good.
the importance of him, not just the fact that Picard was chosen by Q. It's just the fact that how close they are and how close Picard could be to people. He chooses not to.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's not until you have to say goodbye to him that Picard truly realizes, all the bonds he's made by the end. And then carrying that on. At first, I thought that was actually a clever detail of Matalas to kind of show, hey, he's not, the character of Picard's not forgetting what just happened in season 2.
Yeah, exactly.
And just like what you said, it just flows perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of other things, theories about Dr. Crusher, but it's all sheerly conjecture. So I don't really want to get into all of it.
Unfortunately, yeah, after one episode, the only thing we can do is actually kind of assume or guess or speculate, actually, of like what's going to happen or what's her point in the story. I honestly think that if this is the actual focus, is like focusing on the relationship of Picard and Beverly, why they could never be together, tie it to Picard's, own
Story.
social anxiety trauma story that we got going. I think that that's the best way to carry on why Beverly's here.
Yeah. I agree. I will say that Gates McFadden looks amazing.
Yeah.
She's
she does.
73 years old. She looks...
Is that why we didn't have Troy?
How dare you? She's aged so well.
She did, yeah. And the amazing thing by far is like, this series has to show people age does not matter. You, as long as you got the acting chops, you should be able to actually pull off.
Oh, I thought you meant when it comes to
characters.
sex.
Well, that too. Because come on, let's face it.
18. The opposite doesn't matter.
Opposite doesn't matter. But Gates, if
Decreased
I had
age does matter. Increased age does not.
Yeah. If you had the choice, Gates McFadden, I'm sure you would jump at the opportunity.
I would definitely take her out on a date.
Date? That's it? Come on, Mike. Go for the touchdown.
I don't want to be obscene. I'm turning over a new leaf in 2023. At least until we get to 7 and 9. Then I'll throw all that out the window.
Just test her flexibility out. Come on. See what's underneath the doctor.
She's 73. Gear. I don't think she has flexibility, Dave.
You could carry her. I've seen porn, Mike. I've seen some stuff done.
No, but she does look great.
She does.
I was impressed. It's nice to see her back on the screen too.
Her and also like I'm really surprised how well all the actors have looked. That's why I'm like so nervous about seeing Brett Spiner because he has to play Lore again, and I'm like,
I'm not.
He's not going to pull this off. He can't. There's no way. He does. I mean, Brett Spiner is aged. We've seen it already.
Unless his consciousness has possessed What's his name? Inigo?
Inigo, yeah.
Inigo bullshit soon.
Oh, dude, but if I will say this right now, if that happens, you're the one who called it. It wasn't me.
Dude, it's so hacky though, but if they do it right, it could work. They have to do something. They can't just ignore his age. Because even Data in the first season, I love the sequence between him and Picard at the end of the season.
Oh,
it was so heartfelt.
It's heartfelt.
It was so good, but it was hard to swallow the fact that Data, you're trying to sell this off as if Data's never aged, and the dude looks bloated. Like, that sounds really bad.
But it's true.
Not bloated. Like most of us, as we get older, we gain some weight in the face. He doesn't look all slender like a young man. It's obvious he's 40 years older.
So the thing that sucked was they never really explained it. Not like, Q. Me and you had that problem with Q coming back.
Oh, that was I called that.
John
Dave.
Delancey's gonna.
Did I not call that?
But yeah,
how they were going to explain it.
It made sense and it worked.
Yeah,
but that's because Q can do this.
Yep.
I don't know how they're going to explain the lore thing.
We'll see. All right, so Riker and Picard together again. If you're going to bring in a character like Riker, okay, there's got to be more than just simply the nostalgia feels, because yes, as a Star Trek fan, I was so happy to see them side by side. It did get me really giddy, but also, just like we said, if you're getting introduced characters, they got to have a point, which Riker does have a point.
Yes, he does.
But also, don't bring Riker out of mothballs. It's been 20-some years, roughly, right? Since the last time we saw him on screen. Well, besides the little bit part he played in the first season. But obviously, he's going to be a major factor in this season. Don't bring him in just to be plot motivation. Give him, or at least give his story some substance. And the fact that they alluded to this idea that he's having problems at home.
I'm so happy you actually caught that, because I was worried that people would not notice that.
The reason why I noticed it is because I was happy. I was like, good. They're going to work something out for him to give him more depth, because Riker has always been the character. I feel like he was always the character that the young kids could like. He's the good-looking, cool guy that gets the ladies, but he was never really the star. I know now, in fact, they said it in an interview recently, Star Trek Next Generation has always been ensemble. Like, yeah, possibly on paper, but the leads have always been, especially in the movies, Brent Spiner's Data and Patrick
Picard.
Stewart's Picard.
Yeah.
Those have always been the most popular characters, and that's why when you move into the movie form, you're going to have to use those characters' popularity in order to sell movie tickets, to get people's asses in seats. So that being said, we haven't really seen real depth being added to Riker since the actual Next Generation show. Riker was more of just plot motivation and background in most of the movies.
Yeah.
He had great moments, but that's what they were. And that's also the nature of a movie, so I understand. But if you're bringing him back into a 10-part series, let's give him some fucking substance. Let's build out his story a bit.
Oh, yeah. That's why I was a little worried when they introduced the Titan and Riker, because unless you're like a hardcore Star Trek fan, you don't know that story of the Titan.
But they did mention it in the final movie.
Exactly. And like, at least they made it plausible. The way they actually treated it was just like what you said. It created a mythos behind Riker, so that, in my opinion, if you're like a mass audiences, you'll be like going, hey, what's that all about? Why would they talk about Riker's time with this ship? Well, now you can go back and you actually see, hey, there was actually stories done in book form of the Titan with Riker as the captain.
It's not canon, though.
Yeah.
And if you get sold on, listen, I read Star Trek books all the time, and they're not canon. But just don't get sold on ideas, because they're not going to matter if the TV shows or movies come in and, use a wrecking ball.
But the concept overall is there. We know that he had this deep connection with this ship.
Yeah.
And that's the important part is like they just don't play it like simple fan service like, oh, only fans are going to understand this. Who cares?
No, they gave the casual viewer enough background to understand that he was once the captain of the Titan.
And like that was the important part for me is like, as I said earlier, don't make the season just fan service. Give us a narrative that we can get behind.
Yep.
Give us a story.
Yep.
And Riker's story, dude, I don't know where they're going to go because they have to still tie his narrative to Picard's in some way. And we know Troy does come back.
Well, his story is already by default associated with Picard, but when it comes to the actual substance, I think the stuff with Deanna is just going to be icing.
Icing?
Like, I'm not saying she's not going to have a point. I'm sure she'll have a point as well, but I'm talking about whatever problems he's having domestically, I'm sure will just be there to underline or underscore their appearance here in this season, to bring more substance as we've been discussing. I don't think it's going to be this element that veers off into its own storyline. That would be horrible in a 10-part series where you have 9 characters, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, they won't do that. And we don't need that. We just need, as I said, we just need something, because it's been over 30 years since we've been given something of true value and merit when it comes to Riker's personal development as a character. Okay, so let's talk about 7 of 9. It was nice to see her on the bridge of the Titan as first officer. We had assumed, I think a lot of us assumed, that she was going to be the captain, but she's just the first officer, at least for now. And for purposes of story, it was equally nice to see that it hasn't been a smooth transition. We like problems, David. We're not like most fans. We like our characters to be thrown through the ringer. We like chaos. That's what makes for interesting characters. So I'm glad it wasn't a smooth transition. This is the 7 we expect to see if you're a Voyager fan.
If you're a Voyager fan, yes.
Someone who finds it difficult to conform to situations that feel constraining. That is literally one of the key aspects to 7's story in Voyager.
Oh, yeah.
She's always done her best work, as seen on Voyager, when Janeway gave her freedom to explore her individuality and creativity. And to see that Captain Shaw stifles creativity.
No, he just doesn't stifle it. He stamps it out.
But it works for who 7 is. And this has been my complaint about 7 in Picard since day one. Season 2 did a lot better job realigning 7 with who she actually is, as opposed to who Shaban thought she was in season 1, which was, I didn't recognize her. That wasn't 7 of 9. And I will continue to say that. She was Sarah Connor.
Yeah.
She was not 7 of 9. Second season brought her back down to who we are familiar with.
Yes.
And I liked there's a key moment that just was really powerful. And it was when she was justifying why she's breaking orders. She wants to inspire.
Yes.
I thought that was really powerful. And it was also a philosophical nugget as well. As some people believe that inspiration and optimism are often paired as contingent variables. And optimism, as we know, is a key component of Star Trek at large. There was a philosopher, and I believe he was a theological. No, he was a theology. What's a theology?
I was about to say what.
He was a theology lecturer. That's what I'm looking for. And his name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I believe is his last name. He was a German, and he wrote or said this beautiful philosophical, inspirational treatise. No, it was a fragment, I guess you can call it.
Yeah.
But he wrote the essence of optimism is that it takes no account of the present, but it is a source of inspiration, of vitality and hope where others have resigned. It enables a man to hold his head high, to claim the future for himself, and not to abandon it to his enemies. So I like that because in a lot of philosophical circles, inspiration and optimism are tied together.
Oh, yeah, because, like, especially like if they want to strengthen the idea of Starfleet, and they want to get away from like what I think all of us as Star Trek fans since we started Picard have been rallying against is like this negativity around the idea of Starfleet.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you do it. Philosophically, you have to focus on the inspirational and the hopefulness that brings. And I like the fact that basically Seven brings up the fact. She brings up two figures in Star Trek that epitomize that in Janeway and Picard. When she basically says, you two were the ones that pushed me into Starfleet. And I was like going, yes, those two are the example of what Starfleet should be.
Yeah.
The current state of Starfleet is what we all are, what Matalas narratively is trying to question. He's not questioning the idea of Starfleet overall.
Yeah.
He's just questioning, well, that idea can be corrupted over time. And currently, is the idea of Starfleet that inspirational, poignant moment?
My only problem, and we'll get into, let's just talk about it then with the Shaw aspect. I'm fine with Shaw and how he's essentially just a narrative obstacle. He's there just to make sure things aren't just easy for our characters. You always need those I call them wild cards. That's not the technical term, but that's what I call them. Yeah, foils. Yeah. You need those types of characters. Otherwise, there'll be no resistance, and the characters will seemingly be able to achieve all their goals too easy. And that's not a show.
Well, yeah.
So you need characters like Shaw. But my problem that I had that we talked about during our post show for Patreon is I don't want Starfleet to be painted as bad again. Yes. Because that was the only red flag when Dr. Crusher sends the encoded message to Picard and tells him not to trust anyone, nor Starfleet. I kind of groaned because I don't want Starfleet to be painted into this parochial image of untrustworthy institutions. I understand why we did it at times.
Yeah.
But we need to move past that. And I also understand that each era of Star Trek is written under the lens or through the lens of whatever our feelings are at the time towards our government institutions. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, unfortunately for Star Trek, in later years, it reflects the lack of trust, the skepticism that we have about institutions. So that's why we have this era of Star Trek Discovery, starting with Star Trek Discovery, where it's a little darker. The themes are not as optimistic. They have tried to, again, realign those aspects in later seasons because a lot of people just weren't having it. But there's a reason why the Kelvin Timeline movies did that. There's a reason why the Kurtzman era has done that. It's because our ideas and our perceptions of the governments that control us have changed drastically. Gene Roddenberry, during the era of the original Trek run, he took his ideology from the Kennedy and Johnson era progressive liberalism. And even though that era was completely shrouded in upheaval, there was a lot of good stuff to come of that as well. There was a lot of optimism. There was hope. Yeah. There was light at the end of the tunnel with these progressive movements. And it was reflected in Star Trek's original run. And you can, I'm not going to give people a history lesson, but if you look at every era of Star Trek and then look at what's going on socially and politically, you can see the governing factors. So I'm hoping that despite the fact that we're in kind of a shitty era historically, I think we can all agree that things are fucked currently. I'm hoping that doesn't necessarily find its way yet again into Star Trek, in the form of pessimism and lack of trust.
Yeah.
So that's all I have to say about the Shaw stuff and Beverly Crusher's warning. I don't want Starfleet to be painted the enemy again.
Well, the biggest thing that I want to ask you about the Shaw thing, because at first I'm with you. it really did bother me with the whole Beverly telling, "Oh, you can't trust anybody, not even Starfleet."
Yeah.
And then the way Shaw acts. But then I took a step back and I said, "Okay, this character of Shaw, is it unfair how he is treating the crew?" Yes. How different is that?
Why is it unfair though, David?
Exactly, because like we've seen this type of character before in Star Trek in Jellicoe. Jellicoe was the same way.
Mm-hmm.
He was totally military driven. Everything has to be efficient. Everything has to be by the book. That is not such a bad thing when you're thinking about like in a military purpose, right?
Picard ran a ship like that too,
But
for
not
several seasons.
But not, yeah, for several seasons. But then he stopped.
He eventually softened and
softened up.
became more personable. But
And then in regards to how he treats Seven, the whole Borg thing, I want to ask you your thoughts on that one when it came to Shaw. Is like, at first I just thought, oh God, they're going to make this kind of like about like almost like a parallel for racism, right?
yeah,
But he's doing it against the Borg.
that's
The
fine.
Borg is obviously the most dangerous alien that they in Star Trek that they've ever encountered.
David,
They nearly killed
okay.
everybody.
Now, for people who have problems or object to that,
Yeah.
what I have to say is, how many years did it take for the general population post 9/11 for people to start trusting others from areas who come from areas that are hotbeds of terrorism? To this day, people don't trust certain individuals from the Middle East. So it would make sense, as being imperfect as we are, for someone like Shaw to harbor prejudice and distrust towards anyone that was affiliated, or I should say assimilated, by the Borg.
Exactly.
I think that makes sense.
It makes sense.
That's
Good.
that's the source of his animosity. But also, and I do like that, the fact that he also has a problem with their whole freewheeling attitude. His view, despite the fact that, first off, if I was Picard, I would have said, all right, Shaw, I understand. Touche, you have some points. We do play a little fast and loose. We'll break some rules. But at the end of the day, how many times have you saved the universe? While you sit safely in your neat little cozy chair.
But see, that's something that Picard would not do.
See, if I was Captain Picard,
If you
I
were
would be
Picard.
more like Captain Tony Stark.
Exactly.
I am Iron Man.
I am.
I am the savior of the universe. Who are you?
Who are you?
So even though I understand his perspective, I also say, listen, these guys have saved the universe, dude. Fucking calm the fuck down.
If they ask you a favor, just do it.
Yeah. But I will say overall, the aspects with Captain Shaw worked as a complication, something to frustrate the intentions and plans of our characters.
It's an interesting tightrope that they're going to have to do with him.
Well, and just to reiterate, the fact that he obviously harbors prejudice and distrust toward Borg survivors is a perfect obstacle for both Seven and Picard, particularly as it relates to the trauma and guilt that we know that both characters felt, when it comes to the things that they did while they were assimilated. At this point, it's a part of their characterization and defines both their strengths and potential weaknesses and insecurities. So it works. So I had no problem with it. I felt like it had a perfect part to play in this show, where you're dealing essentially with two ex-Borg.
Yes.
We forget sometimes about Picard,
But
because he
Picard-
doesn't have any, leftover parts on his body like Seven.
Well, that's why I thought that one of my favorite scenes too was actually when they brought up the fact that Riker, the whole
Picard is
reason
not
why-
even human anymore.
Yeah, of that. Wait till they bring that up. But I like that scene where Riker brings up the fact that about Locutus,
Yeah.
and they said that, oh, that's a code name that we used while you were gone. And then Picard realizes during my time as Locutus.
Yeah.
And I like that moment because it really does harken back to, it makes you remember those times that, yeah, Picard was not human.
So we only have a few moments, and I want to get to this. I want to ask you a question, Dave. there was a lot of attention brought to the element of the Borg. Are we going to see the Borg resurface again? So far, they've been a part of season 1 and season 2.
Yes.
So are they going to continue that trend and make it a part of the overall aesthetic of Star Trek Picard?
Well, it's one of those things, dude. I mean, like, at the end of season 2, the Borg wanted to join Starfleet. So that was one of the questions I had going into season 3 is they're going to have to at least bring that continuity over and explain that.
I also don't feel like Starfleet's ready for that, though, because look how Shaw feels still about the Borg.
And you brought up about the whole freaking android body that Picard's in.
Okay.
No one brought that up.
I hope they never bring it up again. In fact, I would be okay if they completely forget about
But
it.
Mike, they got to. They have to.
David,
I'm not saying for
I
like
have to
joke
say
purposes.
that is this. You know what? I'm not going to be negative.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to be negative.
You can't be negative.
I cannot be
because
negative.
remember, you said we have to continue continuity.
Well,
You
listen.
have to let continuity flow.
The idea of Borg being put in a golem body.
You know, when you say it.
David, I say it like that because that's how it is. It sounds stupid because it is stupid. What they did in season 1 with that was one of the silliest things I've ever seen in Star Trek. And there's been some silly things in Star Trek over the years.
And
Now, it could have worked, as I had said numerous times, if they had used it as a way to discuss, phenomenology, the experience of the human. What does it mean about the human condition? Are you still human? If they posed philosophical questions, I would say, what an awesome way to delve into the philosophy of human consciousness.
Exactly.
And the human soul.
Yes.
That would be brilliant. But no.
No.
Not even allusions to that.
But is it too late, though? Is it
No,
too late?
it's not.
Exactly.
In fact, retrospectively, Matalas could fix that by addressing it in this season. So going back to what you were saying, Dave, yes, I feel like they should touch on it, but only if they're doing it to fix it philosophically.
There you go.
I mean, Star Trek is built on philosophy. That right there that's why I got so angry, because the idea of the humanity, that's like the perfect avenue for Star Trek philosophy, and they did nothing with it.
They did nothing.
Yeah. All right, we have to close out, but quickly. Raffi is now a part of Starfleet intelligence.
Which is freaking cool. That's a cool use of her.
Yes, and seemingly she's been in deep cover for quite some time, attempting to recover world-ending, I believe is the words she used, weaponry that was stolen from the Daystrom Institute. And we saw the ramifications of that theft at the tail end of the episode with the District 7, I want to say they called it.
Yes.
Being completely destroyed.
Yeah. And in weird fashion, too. Like, I've never seen a weapon like that before. So they're going to be introducing new technology.
I thought at first was like this I thought it was at first a massive transporter because it looked like a transporter, like the colors and the energy scheme looked like it, and how it encompassed and then dematerialized the building seemingly.
Yeah.
And then the way it dropped it
On
afterwards.
everything.
But I went to the wiki, and I guess it's being described as a quantum gateway.
Quantum gateway.
Give me a second. If you could talk, I'm going to look it up. Okay?
See,
1 second.
Automatically, you tell me it's a quantum gateway. And I'm thinking, okay, so it's wormhole technology.
Okay. As the La Serena approaches the recruiting center,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
she receives some static. Okay. Yeah. A quantum tunnel opens under the recruiting center, tearing it apart.
Only for it to reform and then basically drop everything above another district.
Yeah, so it looks like it's some type of transportation gateway, right? But they
Yeah.
used it as a weapon.
As a weapon.
To destroy something.
So leave it to Star Trek to find new ways of using normal technology and just absolutely ruining it for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, Dave. So I wanted to get into this postmodernism and nostalgia and fan service and what it all means. We don't have time to get into that during our regular show, so we're going to do it for our Patreon discussion. And that's what we're going to be doing all season, just because the ever-changing landscape of podcasting and our own careers and schedules sometimes conflict with the amount of content we can put out. I'm limiting ourselves to an hour per show. And we will cover everything Star Trek this year, but I'm going to keep them at 60 minutes, preferably 55 minutes, and anything that we can't get to, I'll have to do for Patreon subscribers exclusively. So if you want the second part of our discussions, head over to patreon.com/RaymanDigital and pledge to our podcast tier. Briefly, David, 30 seconds or less, give me your final thoughts on this episode and your RMD score.
Man, my final thoughts on this, it took a while. So I'm going to actually automatically right now sit at an 89 on the episode.
Okay.
I really liked the episode, but I'm also very torn about the episode. We'll probably talk about it more in our second part discussion, because I think when you explained about like the second part discussion, that kind of hit everything that I had concerns with.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it was a good premiere. I thought it was a very strong premiere. So an 89 right off the get-go. Hopefully Terry Matalas continues a strong series.
Okay. David, we don't have time for my final thoughts, but I will say I am giving this episode a 90% on the RMD score. Usually you're higher than me.
Well, as I said, my thoughts kind of are swayed by what we're going to discuss in the next part of our discussion.
Yeah. Okay. We will talk to everyone next week. Remember, find us wherever you listen to your podcast. Just search Star Trek from the Holodeck, and also subscribe to our Patreon feed, patreon.com/RainManDigital. Thank you.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.